any discussion of the American government, American political system, would be incomplete unless we took into account the two-party system of the United States, which had evolved by the late, maybe mid-19th century. There had been other groups during that time period, progressives, but broadly speaking, by the time we're entering the 20th century, we've got two major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And we need to know what these parties are like and have a sense of who some of the major figures have been in those parties. We're particularly concerned in this unit about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the president responsible for the New Deal. Well, in fact, there were two New Deals between 1933 and the end of his life in 1945 during World War II. But he's not the only significant figure that we need to be conscious of. The Republican Party was actually founded by Abraham Lincoln back in the 1860s as an anti-slave party. It wasn't always the conservative party of American politics. That's a relatively recent development. When we look at the presidents of the United States that we study often in a modern history course, the names that come up, we can very quickly sort them into Democrats and Republicans. Just zipping through here, famous Democrat presidents have been, obviously, FDR, Roosevelt. His vice president, who takes over when Roosevelt dies, Harry Truman. Harry Truman's responsible for the end of World War II and dropped the atomic bombs, or ordered the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. President John F. Kennedy. Lyndon Baines Johnson. After Kennedy was assassinated, it was President Johnson, the vice president at the time, who took over, a great big tall Texan. And perhaps some of you will remember Barack Obama, the first African-American US president. Famous Republican presidents have included Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and at the time I'm recording this, Donald Trump, who is the current US president. Very important for us to keep in mind is that as we progress through this course, we're going to study the Vietnam War. And Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon were three very important US presidents during the Vietnam War. That's a slight sidetrack, but I do like to mention these elements as they come up throughout our course. The first president that we'll be concerned with in this course is Woodrow Wilson. He was America's president during World War I. He was followed by Warren Harding, a Republican, and Harding, then Coolidge, then Hoover were presidents during what became known as the Roaring Twenties. Hoover was president during the Wall Street crash, October 1929, which brought in, or I guess saw the start of, the Great Depression. And it was Roosevelt who was elected as a Democrat then, after an absence for about a decade from the political stage, from having no Democrat presidents for about a decade. Roosevelt is elected as a person who would set America on an even course again, to steer the American ship of state back in the right direction after the calamity, the emergency of the Great Depression and huge unemployment had set in. Something to be aware of, as I've touched on earlier, is that by the mid-1900s, by the mid-20th century, roughly, Democrats have been associated with being the more progressive side of US politics. They are seen as the ones who are more likely to be an interventionist side of US politics, that they will intervene in foreign affairs. They'll become involved in the world outside. A word that's used at the moment is globalist. They're presidents who have tended to become connected to the outside world, involved in organisations like the United Nations or the Paris climate change talks in recent times. Democrats have tended to be involved in that. They've also been seen as the presidents responsible for big government, more regulation, perhaps more taxes, more services, a larger public service executive branch of government, prepared to use their power more willingly to change American society. The Republicans, on the other hand, are associated with being conservative and more likely to be isolationists, putting America first, withdrawing from the outside world, not connecting to foreign entanglements, as was called the connections to the world by earlier presidency. They tend to be a smaller government, and they tend to favour individual freedoms as opposed to large government involvement in the world. As you go through your studies, you might like to have a look at these questions, these terms, hit pause. They're the sort of ideas that should come up in your study at this very early stage.